Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alan Gold, and I want to thank you all for joining our webinar today entitled Implementing TMS, Benefits and Lessons Learned. Again, my name is Alan Gold. I'll be your host today, and I'm with BestTransport. Before we get started, I just wanted to say a few words to those of you who are on the webinar and not fully familiar with BestTransport. We've been in business providing transportation management software since 2000. We have an international customer base, and we have a very deep domain knowledge of the transportation industry and how technology can improve supply chains. We are a 7-time winner of Inbound Logistics Magazine's Top 100 Logistics Provider, and most recently we were named a notable vendor by Gartner in their 2015 Magic Quadrant. I will talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. We are 100% focused on the development and provision of cloud-based TMS software solutions, and we provide those services to shippers, carriers, and suppliers in the vertical supply chains that we serve. Most recently, Gartner, for those of you who are familiar with them, then you'll recognize the Magic Quadrant for TMS. For those of you who are not familiar, Gartner is the world's largest and most respected IT analyst firm in the country, actually really in the world. And as you can see here on this slide, they evaluated a wide range of TMS providers, as they do every year, and had some very important and very nice things to say, for which we're very pleased, that we have a holistic and cloud-based system, that we are particularly adept at complex loads, and you'll hear some of that from the folks on the call today. And we provide a depth and maturity of product that is something worth taking note of. But you're not here to listen to me talk about BestTransport, though we hope at some point you'll be interested enough to learn a bit more about what we do. So today what I want to do is talk about implementing TMS, benefits, and lessons learned. And I'd like to start by introducing today's panelists. First up is Brandon DiGiulio. He is the Senior Manager of Logistics for Aleris. Aleris, as I'm sure most of you on this call know, is a global leader in the manufacture and sales of aluminum rolled products. Brandon has over 10 years of logistics and supply chain experience in a wide range of transportation, third-party logistics, and manufacturing roles. For the last 4 years, he's worked at Aleris, and he's been in his present role as the Senior Manager of Logistics, overseeing a 6-person team that's responsible for all of North America's freight spend at 9 different production facilities. Pat Taff was going to join us. I believe that he has been detained in transit. He was traveling back and expected to be able to join, but sends his regrets, the joys of travel, I'm afraid. But we do have ready to chat with us and with you, Kathy Groh-Canby. She is the Corporate Transportation Manager at Bull Moose Tube. Bull Moose is a steel pipe and tube manufacturer headquartered in Chesterfield, Missouri, and they have 7 plant locations throughout the U.S. and Canada. Kathy has been with Bull Moose Tube for 25 years and has held positions in employee relations, accounting, project management, and she has 14 years with the transportation side of the business. She's focused utilizing technology to smooth and speed the flow of information throughout the shipping process, and her team of 6 is responsible for over 25,000 outbound shipments per year from all of Bull Moose's facilities. And last but certainly not least is John Virolo. He is the General Manager with Nolan and Cunnings. He has 24 years experience in logistics and operations and sales management at Nolan and Cunnings, which is a freight audit and consulting company. He has been involved in a wide range of activities, both in terms of the management of as much as 900 million shipments annually, totaling about $5.5 billion in audited spend. And he has considerable experience, as does Nolan and Cunnings as a firm, in the successful implementation and the benefits of transportation management solutions. So we have a tremendous group of panelists here with us today with a great deal of experience in a wide range of areas, and very much looking forward, as I'm sure you are, to hearing what they have to say. So let's just jump right in. So questions for Brandon. We'll have to skip over Pat since he hasn't been able to join unless he manages to slide on in. So Brandon, what are the top transportation-related headaches that you see at your business today?
Good afternoon. I think the top transportation headache I think that generally everyone faces today is capacity. 2015 is shaping up to be a lot better compared to 2014 with the polar vortex, all the capacity issues. We're still seeing capacity issues out there today. West Coast port strike, but it's significantly looser than what it was in 2014, so that's certainly something that we enjoy. But also visibility into our operations, aligning plant production evenly, getting enough lead time for our shipments, and through the use of BEST, we've been able to attack some of those problems, ease our pain, and look forward instead of kind of being reactive. We've been able to be proactive through the use of BestTransport.
Terrific. Thanks for that. And we hear that, by the way, we hear that a lot in terms of industry issues with driver shortages, with capacity, with shifts in distribution with the Panama Canal nearing completion. So not surprising to hear that that's a huge issue for you. Next question. This will start with you, Kathy. Before you implemented a TMS system, how did you get your goods moved? What was the process that you went through, and where were some of the stressors?
Well, good afternoon. Essentially, we used a lot of paper and a lot of phone calls. So we would get reports from our internal computer system every day as far as what loads were available to ship, and then our shipping folks would combine those loads or those orders into full truckloads, and then as soon as they had those put together, they would get on the phone and start calling people. And so that was a very, very time-consuming process. The ability to make sure that we were getting lowest cost carriers was just not there. If they had a list in their Rolodex of 50 carriers, they would typically go to the person who most frequently takes a load in this lane, as opposed to giving themselves an opportunity to take advantage of the lowest cost carriers in that lane when they had trucks available. When we implemented BestTransport, obviously that changed, because even though our lowest priced carrier may not always have a truck available, if he has a truck available 1, 2, 3 times out of 10, we still enjoy those savings. Plus the whole load tendering process goes much more quickly.
Terrific, very interesting. Did you find that you were able to move products out from the shipping dock out to your customers or the next destination more quickly than driving the manual cycle, or was this more about building up with volume and keeping up capacity?
I think that we were pretty good about moving our loads in a timely manner, but what we have been able to do is to maintain that same service level and grow the business significantly without adding additional resources. So we've probably doubled our load volume and have either the same number or maybe one less person than we had prior to implementing the TMS. And the TMS has given us a tremendous amount of transparency in the entire transportation system. So it's not just a matter of our shipping coordinators knowing what's going on and then having to be back on the phone with our salespeople and our customers. We can take all that information that the TMS provides us, put that into the ERP system, and the information is available immediately to all of the interested parties.
Great, that's very interesting. So in essence, if I heard you correctly, you were able to maintain the same level of service, which was good, but you were able to double that volume and add only one additional person. That's a pretty strong statement on efficiency. Thanks for that, Kathy. While we've got you, can you talk a little bit more about how long you've been using a TMS, and then perhaps roll into some of the business challenges that led to that implementation?
I can. We implemented BestTransport late in 2003. So we've been with Best for a long time. The business challenges that led to the implementation, we had just gone through an ERP implementation about 2 years previous to our implementation of the TMS. After having done that, we realized that we had looked at every portion of the business at best demonstrated practices and implementing those, but we hadn't really done that in the shipping area. The ERP system that we implemented did not have a very strong transportation module, at least one that didn't fit what we did. And so we thought that that was one thing we needed to look at. So we actually looked at two different alternatives. We knew what we had. We looked at going to a 3PL to manage all of our transportation needs, and we looked at going with a TMS. The reason we went with a TMS as opposed to a 3PL, and I'm very glad that we did, with a 3PL, we would have eliminated the resources that we had here who were working in shipping on the administrative side. Some of those folks had 15, 20, 25 years of experience. And once those people are gone or redeployed somewhere else in the organization, you can't get them back if the 3PL experiment doesn't work. And so we determined that what we could do is best supplement that knowledge by implementing a TMS. BestTransport seemed to fit us very well. It was designed for the metals industry. That's where we are. And it used a full truckload approach. Not that it couldn't do LTL, but full truckload was our baby, and it worked very, very well. So the challenges that we had, everybody at that point in time had pretty much gotten the new ERP system under their belt, and then we came along and said we were going to do something else new. So there was a little additional shock to their systems. There was some resistance, obviously, from the folks who held those transportation positions previously. They could not necessarily see how this tool was going to help them. They saw it as a way of replacing them, which was not at all the intention that we had, and which is not at all what we did. But what we did do with it was use the system to allow those folks to solve problems as opposed to do routine things that a system and that computers are designed to do. So I think the challenge was more just overcoming that resistance to change. And I think everybody has that. If you're the one driving the change, it's a whole lot easier for you than if you're the one who's having it driven on you. So that was pretty much our experience.
Wow, thanks. A lot of very interesting stuff in there. 2 points that struck me in all of this, and maybe of interest to our audience, is the fact that looking at a 3PL and the pluses and minuses of that was one of the options. We've seen from not just our customers and people with whom we speak, but also analyst surveys, that roughly speaking, about the same number of companies per year are implementing TMS solutions as make shifts to 3PL. So what that really means is that there's a pretty frequent cycling around of trying a 3PL and seeing if that works. And in many cases, we're contacted by companies who are bringing things back in-house uh, for exactly the kinds of reasons that you described, Kathy. The other thing that struck me as well that I think may be relevant to note is the fact that there is a change in business process going on when one implements a new solution, whether it's going to help your job or not. It injects change into it, and that requires a certain sensitivity by management and a certain stick-to-itiveness that it sounds like you and your team employed. So that's great to hear. Thank you.
You're welcome.
John, let's shift over to you. From your perspective, who are the key stakeholders in a TMS decision? And again, in your experience, what kinds of challenges do they put out when you're talking with them and advising them about how to move forward?
Well, it's TMS touches so many different areas of a shipper's business that the stakeholders really come from all areas of the business and not just from the logistics side of things. So we find that when we're talking to a potential TMS customer, that we really are dealing with the manufacturing and operations folks, in addition to the logistics and the finance people, because a TMS system gives a client the ability to really look at their total supply chain from the purchasing of the raw materials all the way through to the cost to serve customers and things along that line. So those kind of things touch every area of a customer's business. So we find that we spend quite a bit of time, especially in the lead up to implementation, with each and every one of the stakeholders within the shipper's organization to make sure that all of their needs and desires and requirements are being included and met with the TMS solution that we're presenting to them. And it never disappoints. We oftentimes in the post-implementation meetings with the shippers we hear more and more. It's like, geez, we should have done this 5 years ago, because it's improved not only our shipping and logistics, but our total business process as a whole. And they regret not doing it sooner. So we find that we are working with all areas of a customer's business throughout the sales and implementation of a TMS system.
Thank you. So I guess a follow-up to that then would be, and thank you for that, is can you share a little bit with the audience? I'm sure they're interested in the kinds of returns on investment throughout the organization they've seen. And you mentioned that it does touch all aspects of the business. So I'm wondering if there are some generalities you can make about ROI.
Painting it with a broad brush and looking at it across all of our customers that we've helped with TMS implementations. The inbound side of things, which unfortunately is usually the hardest to manage for any kind of shipper, because vendors oftentimes are shipping to them prepay an ad or adding freight costs into the piece prices of the material that they're purchasing. So helping by utilizing TMS and implementing it and helping the customers take back control of their inbound freight, we find that customers can reduce their overall costs in greater than 20% of what they've previously spent. Outbound, we typically see savings of about 15% on average of what a customer pays in freight costs. So it's pretty substantial savings on both inbound and outbound, but just the control and visibility that a shipper can or a manufacturer can exhibit with their inbound freight by implementing a TMS is there's both hard dollar and soft dollar ROI that a customer sees by utilizing a TMS.
Interesting, great. Thanks for that. Brendan, over to you. Can you talk a little bit about what your implementation experience was when TMS was going in? What kinds of things went well, and what, to your recollection, were the challenges?
Sure. So BEST was already implemented as our TMS system prior to me coming on board 4 years ago. But when I joined, I was tasked to roll out the TMS to 4 of our facilities in the last quarter of the year. As far as what went well, it was surprisingly very easy to implement without having any prior knowledge of the system. I worked with another analyst on our team, and we were able to put together a checklist. Kind of here's the things that we got to knock out to be successful. So we kind of put together a project plan to roll it out. So as far as what went well, because BEST is a SaaS offering versus having to install something locally on your computer, it was very easy to get up and running, and especially to be able to roll it out to 4 facilities within a 3-month time frame. I think that's kind of unheard of in terms of implementing a TMS. As far as challenging, I wouldn't so much say it's the system as it is convincing people internally within your company, hey, there is true value in the system, because with any TMS, ultimately what people see is the cost associated with it, and they don't realize the true benefits that you get from the system. A lot of it being optimizing the tendering process, increased visibility, and ultimately the amount of data, the data that you get from the system and what you can do, analytics with that, both internally inside the TMS and exporting that data from the report builder tool and running analytics. But personally for me, the challenging part wasn't so much implementing it as it is selling people internally within the company, hey, there is true value here, and we're going to be able to get increased visibility and manage our freight costs, save money on our freight versus if we're just doing the manual process and picking up the phone and calling our carrier list or blasting out emails.
Interesting. So you echo some of the comments that Kathy made a few minutes ago, that it's not so much about the technology in many cases, but it's about getting adoption and people comfortable with a different way of approaching their transportation work. Very good. Thanks for that. Well, Kathy, speaking of whom, back to you. And I think you and Brandon also touched on this a little bit, but I'd love to have you expand a bit. What were, or even what are some of the roadblocks that you went through in order to get buy-in to move forward, especially given in your case you were with a kind of a 3-legged evaluation with multiple choices.
Right.
How did that process go?
Well, I think from a senior management perspective, once we evaluated the options that we had identified, there was no problem at all as far as buy-in at that level. When we got outside the company and when we got below senior management, however, it was a little more difficult. You have to remember this was 12 years ago, so people were still a little nervous about technology, especially on the carrier side. We use a lot of small mom and pop carriers. And so one of the biggest concerns they had was, if you're going to be tendering these out over the internet, I don't have a computer. I'm used to using the phone. And BestTransport worked very well for us because there were so many ways in which carriers could get their load tenders. And some of the mom and pops, if one of them was out driving, somebody could get a call on their cell phone telling them that they had been offered a load. These days, I know that Best is continuing to do some development, that the mobile app is something that's very important at this point, and I think that will make the product that much friendlier for the smaller carriers. But getting the carriers to go to a TMS was a little bit difficult. The big guys, the really big guys, had already started down that path, But as you got into some of the smaller carriers, that was difficult. So there was a big learning curve for them, a lot of patience required on our side. From our sales folks, there was some resistance. They liked being able to just pick up a telephone and call someone at the plant they were shipping from and say, what's happening with load 537? Well, now, in some cases, that person is doing something else in shipping, and they really don't have time to answer those kinds of questions, and we've provided that information within our ERP system. We're very, very tightly integrated with Best. And so it was a matter of retraining them, teaching them that you don't need to pick up the phone. This information is at your fingertips, and you can see it. And finally then, with our shipping staff, just getting those administrative folks used to the idea of having this tool and really encouraging them to exploit that, to think outside what it offered them today, to think about what questions they'd like to see it answer that maybe they're not seeing. So I would say those are probably the main things, those three groups of folks. They were certainly all roadblocks that we could get around or work our way through, but it did slow the process a bit, or at least we had to take all of those into account when we went through the process.
Really interesting, and I take away from that maybe of some interest to our audience is the reminder that because of the nature of TMS and what you're trying to accomplish, you're stretching out into an ecosystem that goes out beyond your business and touches carriers, and there has to be compliance and certain level of collaboration and cooperation on that side as well. So it's an important thing to remember. John, what's your thought from your unique vantage point? What do you see as roadblocks and difficulties?
Well, what we have seen, and I have a little bit of a different perspective on it than Kathy does, and I'm going to focus more on actually the shipper that's implementing the TMS, and that is, everybody's trying to do more with less, and companies, across the globe, not just in North America, are trying to operate thinner and thinner, and what we find is the biggest roadblock is resource availability and getting people assigned to specific tasks as it relates to the implementation of TMS, and particularly as it relates to the IT resources. Well, what we have found with Best and some of the other solutions that we've looked at in the past and worked with in the past is that it's really not as onerous and cumbersome to implement TMS from a shipper's IT perspective. If they're not doing it, and if they haven't done it, they don't know that, so they tend to push back that, no, we don't have the IT resources available to dedicate to build the integration and things along that line that it's going to take for a successful TMS implementation. And so getting resources allocated and then getting the resources on board to the process and understanding what is involved and what each stakeholder in the implementation is going to have to do has probably been one of the most prevalent roadblocks that we've come across when working with our customers and with TMS.
Interesting perspective. Thanks for the flip side of that coin. Appreciate it. So now, for all three of you, I think everyone would be interested to know what you think from your perspective is the biggest myth about putting a TMS in place. Brandon, how about if we start with you?
Sure. I think, and this is maybe just from my point of view and my company's point of view, I think maybe one of the biggest myths is, hey, you implement a TMS system and then it's just going to book the trucks for you. And at the core, that's not truly what a TMS does. Sure, it's going to optimize your freight tendering process, and you can also do freight payment within the system. But the biggest I think value is certainly visibility in the data that you get from the system. So maybe, again, going back to the internal cell, we're people within the company think, hey, you have a system, why aren't you able to get trucks? Isn't that what a TMS does for you? It books capacity for you. There's still the management of the system and doing RFPs and actually managing your carrier base and scorecarding these guys and developing different metrics and whatnot. But I think as far as the biggest method internally is really educating. If a company's going through this process and looking to implement a TMS, it's a good opportunity to educate internal stakeholders. Hey, here's what a TMS does, but here's the true value. It's going to give us visibility to which lanes are trouble lanes for us because we have to put it out to tender multiple times. Hey, here's a metric we developed for lead time, so we know, hey, this plant isn't performing maybe as well as other ones, so hey, we need to get additional lead time because also this is a trouble area for us as far as capacity. So I think biggest myth is there's still involvement and management within the system, and it's not just going to go out and book freight for you, but it certainly makes things significantly easier, and you have all the data at your disposal to run metrics and analytics to help you be a better manager and help ultimately save your company money.
Great perspective, interesting stuff. Kathy, what was the biggest myth that, or what do you think, I should say, what do you think the biggest myth is around putting a TMS into place?
I have to echo 100% what Brandon said. I get the impression sometimes that our folks think we have trucks circling our plants just waiting for us to tell them where we want them to go. And that is about the furthest thing from the truth. And I don't know how many times I've heard, isn't Best supposed to give us trucks? And we try to reinforce, even after 12 years, I have folks who say that. It's a tool. It is no different, it's much more sophisticated, but it's no different than that paper and telephone that we used 12 years ago before we had it. You still have to have those carrier relationships. You still have to look at who can service your account, who performs, who's not performing, and some of the exception management that Brandon talked about. Those things become more and more critical, and I think the better you get, the less attention people pay to the 80, 85, 90% of your loads that go without a problem, and the more attention they pay to the problems, and because they're not used to seeing those. And so I think a system like a TMS gives you the tools that you need to really manage those exceptions.
Great points. John, what are your thoughts from your perspective?
Well, I think the biggest myth that I think we've come across, and this typically has to do with the people kind of in the trenches and on the floor that are tendering the shipments, and our utilization of TMS or with our customers has been more on a high volume, both on an LTL and a parcel side of things, in addition to truckload and flatbeds and things along that line, is that they're afraid of the change, and they think that adding and introducing a new process, that it's going to take longer, that it's going to slow them down, and that they're going to fall behind, and they're going to have issues with staging and things along that line, and that couldn't be further from the truth, because the TMS is going to help make them more efficient while helping them make the right choices in routing and tendering of freight. So I think that it's that the biggest myth that we run into is that it's going to take too long, and that they're not going to be able to get their material off the dock and on the road as quick as they could prior to TMS.
Interesting. Thanks for that. Now there's a question that I should say that we have here in the presentation, but it's also come in from a number of you in the audience. Is there a surprise, that one big surprise or a bunch of small surprises that ultimately came from implementing a TMS, something that you hadn't expected that's adding value that's outside of what the primary reason for bringing it in place or putting in place was? Brandon, your thoughts?
Yeah, I would say it's probably more so smaller surprises that pop up along the way. Nothing that's really major. And again, coming from 4 years ago when I was tasked to roll it out to 4 facilities, I think it was just the buy-in that you do need from not only upper management but also down at the plant level. So again, no one likes change, and to John's point prior about it being you're more efficient with the TMS versus not having one. I think maybe that was the one big surprise is actually going down to the plants and implementing the system was maybe their lack of buy-in originally, because they don't completely understand what the system's about, what the added value is that you're going to get out of it. And there's certainly going to be pushback from people that don't want to buy into it, that don't trust it, that will come back and say, hey, what's wrong with the way that we tender and book carriers today? And I think maybe the one big surprise is how it may take a month or 2 months, but how they eventually change their viewpoint and come to see that, hey, a TMS is a great system to have. It is allowing us to be more efficient, especially for some smaller facilities that maybe our shipping supervisors also out there loading trucks or doing other things at the plant. It's going to allow them to be more efficient in what they do so they could focus their time on other things at the facility. But as far as smaller surprises go, there's always going to be something that falls through the crack. No implementation is going to be perfect. You're going to try and get all your carrier base listed. You're going to try and identify all your rates for lanes. There's always going to be something that falls through the crack when you implement a TMS. I think I personally have been involved in implementing the TMS at I think 9 facilities. But no matter what, it's nothing major. You're not really gonna drop the ball, because as you implement the TMS each time, you're gonna learn from each implementation. But there's nothing, from my point of view, that is a major deal breaker when you're implementing it. Again, I think it's just maybe the pushback that you get from the actual shipping supervisors at the facility, and then how quickly they turn around and come to buy into using the TMS and the increased efficiencies that you get from it.
Great, thank you. John, anything to add?
Well, I actually do have that one big surprise that I've seen over and over again with customers that we've assisted with TMS implementation, and that is, I can't tell you how many shipping managers and finance managers that have come back to me and said, wow, we were really doing a poor job at routing previously. We were doing a poor job selecting carriers. We were using, Kathy talked about it, the old static routing guides or state-to-state pairs and things along that line. And that, the carriers have gotten very, very sophisticated over the years with their pricing models and knowing what lanes they're profitable in and pricing accordingly. And the shippers took a while to catch on to that. And so they were not always using the most cost-effective carrier when they were routing a shipment, or they weren't necessarily, they have one of those tweener weight shipments where, okay, is it better to ship this as an LTL or is it better to ship this as a truckload? And without a tool like a TMS, they were very regularly routing it improperly, either on the wrong carrier or in the wrong mode. So they were, in turn, spending more money. And after a very short period of time by using TMS and seeing the benefits and the savings that come along with it, I've had, like I said, multiple shipping managers come back to me and say, man, we were doing such a poor job with our awarding and tendering of freight in the past, and TMS has just been a savior in that regard.
Really, really interesting. Thanks for that. Now, Brandon, back to you. I'd love to know your thoughts on whether or not, since you've implemented TMS, whether or not customer service has changed, whether or not there've been improvements, or for that matter, God forbid, something less than improvements post implementation of TMS?
Sure. I would break customer service up into two pieces, both internal and external customer service. So internal customer service, both sales and operations and supply chain. Our sales group has visibility into the dock schedules for most of our facilities. So if their customers are coming back and saying, hey, when is this load expected to ship? Do you guys have a truck on this? When is this going to deliver? That's something that we would not have had before without having the sales group have to reach out to our dispatch, corporate dispatch team and say, hey, what's going on with these shipments? Now we can put that information in the sales group's hands so they can provide real-time feedback and information to their customers. So that, I guess, parlays into the external customer service. And a measure that we have internally is SOTIF, shipped on time in full. Through some metrics and analytics that we've developed this year from the information that we've got from the TMS, we've been able to drive our SOTIF up to levels that we haven't seen in years past. But although we've had a TMS system for years now, we've taken things to the next level and really gotten better with the data that we get from the system and developing lead time metrics and identifying, again, the lanes that we have issues with and tracking how many loads are posted versus how many that we get covered in a day. So we're able to identify inefficiencies in our supply chain overall, and we're able to become more efficient in how we're operating at the plant level, how we're sharing information internally between supply chain, sales, operations, logistics, and we've certainly been able to increase our customer service level to levels that we certainly wouldn't be seeing if we didn't have a system that gave us that visibility, that real-time data that we wouldn't have otherwise if we were doing things manually.
Great. Really, really good information. Thank you. And with that, it brings us to the last of our questions. First, most importantly, I want to thank Brandon, John, and Kathy for their time and their very thoughtful perspective. I want to apologize for butchering your names. It was inadvertent. I also want to let you know, as an audience, thank you very much for participating in all of this. We did get a number of questions in that we rolled into the presentation. But if you have other questions or follow-up or want to get more information, please feel free to send me an email at the address here, agold@besttransport.com, or you can send something in to info@besttransport.com, and one of our people will get back to you. Again, thank you all so much for listening. We hope you found it of value, and thanks again to our panelists for sharing their considerable insights into all of this. Thank you again, and have a good rest of your day. Take care.